My name is Michael. I am here to talk about my visual music animation, Bright Shadows. It was originally done for my master's thesis for an immersive theater, which is essentially just a theater or a screen that wraps around your peripheral view. But I adapted it to VR, and I'm really excited about it, and I hope you guys like it. I'm going to talk your ears off about it. Okay, so Bright Shadows is part of a long tradition of a type of visual art called visual music. And really that's just a blanket term for visual art that aspires to the purity and self-sufficiency of music. Or it aspires to musical analogy mostly. And what we typically think of when we talk about visual music are things like music videos, concert visuals, like light shows. Fantasia is a popular visual music example, but it also applies to other kinds of art forms like painting and photography. And that's actually where it all came out of. In the late 1800s, a lot of art critics and art theorists really rallied around this idea that music is a kind of pure medium, that visual art should aspire to the purity and self-sufficiency of music. And specifically what they were talking about was absolute music, which is it's just a fancy word for music that doesn't have any kinds of lyrics or spoken word or anything like that. So what we typically think of now is classical music. And they really liked it because it could evoke emotion without any kinds of mention to person, place, or thing. It speaks to us on like a fundamental level. So that's kind of part of what started the whole abstract expressionism movement. And it was really just trying to get that idea of purity without making mention to person, place, or thing onto a canvas. So Wassily Kandinsky is one of the artists, and he attributed all of the inspiration for his artwork to music. He would listen to a piece of music and then kind of internalize how he feels and then put it down on a canvas, which is actually the kind of approach that I'm taking for my work. And my project is inspired mostly by this time period of visual music in the early to mid 1900s, when visual music started creeping into things like avant-garde animation and film. And these are the big artists that were inspirations for me. And they, as you can see, they have a lot of the same kind of visual motifs that the Kandinsky painting and other abstract expressionist paintings had, but they moved around, which was the difference. So I just want to play a quick clip from a big influence for me in this work by Oscar Fischinger. And hopefully there's sound. Okay. Oh no, get out of here. So a couple things I just want to point out from this is he's using absolute music, of course, which is what we think of as classical music. This animation is all taking place in a static space, meaning that there's no film cuts or there's not the typical film language things that we see when we watch films. There's no spatial or temporal cuts. It's all kind of unfolding in front of the viewer, kind of like a performance, like ballet or theater, that kind of thing. And the last thing is that as these shapes kind of move and twirl around, they're amorphous, meaning they stretch out and squash down. And this is a quality that I really wanted to bring to my animation, although that proves to be very difficult in 3D animation. So I originally made this for a theater, like I said before, which is why I chose to go with pre-rendered 3D animation. Obviously, that's not ideal for VR because you can't move around in the space, but it actually gives you a lot of things that real-time animation struggles with, or real-time graphics struggle with, and that's really high resolution and realistic lighting and shading algorithms, which adds a lot to your sense of presence in the piece. And I used Houdini for the rendering. The piece of music I selected is called Ombre Lumineuse by Costin Mirianu. He's a French composer, and it's not what we typically think of as the kinds of music we're used to listening to. It's an avant-garde piece. It was made in the 80s, and it's broken up into these distinct movements, and each movement kind of has its own emotional feeling associated with it. And it's made up of soundscapes, which is, not your typical melody and rhythm and that kind of thing. It's very arrhythmic, and it kind of builds up more of an atmosphere than it does, typical music. And that was an interesting challenge for me. It also has an emotional narrative, meaning it starts off kind of slow, and then it builds up tension, and then things kind of mellow out, and then it starts building up more and more, and eventually reaches a kind of musical climax, which was also very interesting. So the aesthetic design for this piece is mainly motivated, or the main motivation behind it is just to evoke the feelings that are elicited by the music. You just enhance them. It's not to take the music and kind of make my own thing. I'm really just interpreting the kinds of feelings that I'm feeling when I listen to the music and just putting them on video, like the visual music. And then, trying to get those morphological changes, very, very simple forms, like that animation I showed you, and the abstract expressionist work, and non-representational, meaning, no person, place, or thing. And lastly, the big thing I wanted to do was to create a synthetic space. And this is what I did for a theater. The way I went about it was I didn't want to do any kind of spatial cuts or temporal cuts or time cuts, anything like that. I just wanted the viewer to sit in front of it and let it unfold in front of him, like old visual music does. And static camera, no motion or anything like that. And even when you're in a theater and it's stereo 3D and nothing is moving, over a while you start to sense that it's actually in the space with you, which it was trying to invoke that kind of feeling, which is really what brought me to VR, which VR does this really, really well. So yeah, it had all the same objectives that I tried to accomplish in this theater, just did it a lot better. So one of the things I was really excited about when I brought this project to VR was that there's very little motion sickness, and I think the big reason is because there's no movement. That's obviously the big conflict is movement. The vestibular conflicts. But some of the other more subtle things that I think really help is that there's a lot of negative space in it, so there's a lot of blackness around you. It feels like you're in a very dark room, and I think that gives a little bit more leeway when things don't quite match up the way you expect them to, because you're not seeing how light should bounce around in a room because it's a dark room. So I think it just gives a little bit of a leeway when things go wrong. Shape from shading conflicts and motion parallax conflicts and that kind of thing. Yeah, so that's it. Back in this room back here. Come check it out. Thank you.
All right, give a big round of applause. Question time. Who's got them? Who's got a question? In the back, Steve.
I did. That's a great question. I actually used chops, which you might know is how Houdini, you can analyze audio with chops. So I brought this piece of music into Houdini, and I split up components of the music, like the different instruments, into frequency ranges. So I tried to extract the drums and separate that from the bass, kind of, and then use that to drive the animation procedurally in Houdini. And a lot of the geometry is built procedurally, which is how I achieved some of the squashing and stretching aspects of it, because there's like underlying systems that kind of form the forms, and when they stretch out, when it moves, the whole form itself stretches out. But yes, thank you.
Next question.
It's the same. Yeah, every time. It's all choreographed. It's very specifically choreographed. I used Houdini and procedural generation to give me the timing that I needed to sort of time everything out. and the data in order, because it's a very long animation. It's about 10 or 11 minutes long, and there's a lot of instrumentation in it. So I used Houdini to kind of make that less daunting. But everything is very handcrafted at the same time. So.
Okay, we've got time for 2 more quick questions. You had one. I noticed your hand was up a while ago.
Yeah, I think you just answered it, but do you see this ultimately as something that you could apply procedurally to just any music that's played, like modern visualizers, or is it something that's always going to need to be handcrafted for a specific song? Well, people are definitely doing that already, but I actually prefer to make handcrafted, choreographed pieces of visual music, just because I think typically when you tend to see things like Winamp or those kinds of visualizers, you get a sense of the system, but it doesn't quite match up with how you feel specifically about the music, and you kind of figure it out after a while. You're like, oh, okay, it's just figuring out when the drum beats are happening and just syncing to that. So I actually really like that kind of stuff, but the kinds of work that I like to focus on are more handmade, choreographed kinds of works.
All right, one more question. I'm going to let you pick it.
Oh, okay. Not all at once. Okay, go ahead. A lot of it is just trying to bring the same kind of feelings that I think visual art has to music. So some examples might be that there's a movement in my work that's very aggressive. It's very there's like loud drums. It's kind of unsettling, and visually what I wanted to do to kind of enhance those feelings were to make forms that are very sharp, which is something that obviously it feels more dangerous. It's more aggressive feeling, and they kind of explode as the drums happen. So it's kind of trying to interpret the sorts of feelings that I get and translating that to a visual form instead of audio. So
all right,
thanks.
Another round of applause for Michael.
Thank you.